Thank you for coming on, Frank.
My pleasure.
So inspiration for a musician is hard to unpick because it's all encompassing and everywhere. But who were your influences growing up, and how did this inform your musical journey? And did you meet any of your heroes?
Good questions all. My first love was Iron Maiden, the metal band, and it's fair to say that they don't have an enormous influence on the music I make now directly. But I would say there's something about the way that Iron Maiden are just a thing unto themselves, and they've never been cool, and they're never going to be cool, and they just sort of do their own thing that I've always loved, and I hope that there's a bit of that spirit in what I do. After that, I got really into Nirvana, and then kind of into the kind of Californian punk rock thing, via Green Day into NoFX and Black Flag and all of those kinds of bands. And then I had a bit of a kind of epiphany in my early 20s when I started listening to kind of Bruce Springsteen, Neil Young, Johnny Cash, Townsend Zant, all that kind of stuff. So those are kind of the big signposts, as it were. But there's obviously loads and loads of others. Bands like the Weaker Thans and the Hold Steady and Pedro the Lion, Regina Spektor. There's a lot of other kind of names in the mix as well. I've met quite a few people whose music I love. Let's put it that way. I've been lucky in that. Generally speaking, it's been great. I met Henry Rollins. That was amazing. I met Ian Mackay. I know John K. Sampson from the Weaker Thans pretty well. He's a friend, and I did a show with Dave Bazan from Pedro the Lion the other day, and my crew were on high alert to stop me acting like a giggling schoolgirl, and I managed to rein it in. It was generally good. I met James Hetfield from Metallica once, and I made a complete prat out of myself. For some reason, I just kind of lost it and just kind of mumbled and fumbled and eventually just sort of got led away by my tour manager, like a moron. So that wasn't brilliant. But beyond that, it's generally been good.
Do you remember when you heard dying?
It just said, do you remember where you were when you heard about Kurt Cobain dying?
Oh yeah. So I was at school, and nobody else in my school liked Nirvana, but I love Nirvana, and I sort of had a bit of a rep at school as being the guy who liked that weird band. And there was an article in the newspaper about it, and I didn't see it. And one of the other kids at school kind of cut it out and put it on a message board, and just sort of grabbed me and went, "That's so you like died," and then sort of walked off. And I was pretty upset by it. It was kind of my first encounter with death as a concept, really. I mean, I hadn't really, someone I admired hadn't really died in my life prior to that. So it was pretty affecting for me.
Yeah.
Okay. How important is it for you to be an independent artist, and how does this enhance your creativity?
It's pretty important. I mean, the word independent means lots of different things at different times to different people in different places. I've actually just finished. I made 5 records with a license deal to a major label, which I completed the deal that I signed and then walked away, which was really fun because they were not expecting me to do that. So I am kind of legally now an independent artist again from that point of view. But I've always felt independent. I mean, one of the things about signing a license deal and the fact that I signed that deal after I'd already had a gold record and headlined some arena shows and stuff, meant that I was pretty comfortable telling them to naff off when they had opinions about my art. Do you know what I mean? So, I've always kind of done my own thing. Having said that, I mean, there were occasionally battles to fight on that front. And one of the nice things about where I am right now and the new record that I just made is that being back in the independent world, like nobody at all is telling me what to do in any way, shape or form, which is lovely. And that is important to me because ultimately, I'm an artist and all that sort of thing. But also there's a fair amount of kind of, I've got to phrase this carefully. There's a fair amount of costs to being a professional musician in terms of like it's physically quite grueling and socially pretty destructive, and all these other kinds of things, and it's not perhaps quite as lucrative as quite a lot of people think it is, and all that kind of thing. And all of that's completely fine, and I'm not complaining about it because I get to make art for a living. I play guitar for a living. I got up this morning, I went down my studio, worked on some tracks. I'm talking about myself now. And it's such a privilege to be creative for a living. So if you weren't free and independent in your creativity, I'm not sure for me that the rest of it would necessarily be worth it, because the other plus side that lots of people are into is the kind of the fame angle, the kind of people shouting at you while they're on stage. And I'm not saying that isn't nice from time to time, but it's also quite weird, and it's not really something I'm that bothered about. The thing I feel really, really lucky that I have is that I'm creative for a living, and as long as that's kind of free and easy, then the deal works for me.
Yeah, man,
Last word. Say the last word again.
mm,
Okay. Josh said, would you go back to the mainstream route?
I mean, mainstream's a funny word because, again, it sort of means different things to different people. In some ways, I think what mainstream means is just having your music exposed to a non-specific audience. If you're kind of underground, it means you put out music and people who like that music tend to be the people who listen to it, which is kind of easier in a way because you get less flack. Let's say that. But you end up playing arguably to smaller audiences as well because it's a specific group of people. But then at the same time, having had a moment in time when the music I make was kind of edging onto being mainstream, there were more people at the shows, but you could definitely tell that quite a lot of people at the back were sort of there because you were on the radio, and the minute you stopped being on the radio, they'd stop coming to shows. And you sort of wonder then like how much they care and therefore how much you care, and in a way I'd rather have a meaningful conversation with a slightly smaller group of people than spend my time yelling at people who don't really care. But I mean, ultimately, whether or not you're mainstream slightly depends on things that you have no control over, because if you write a song that becomes a massive hit, then definitionally you become mainstream. And on some levels, everybody's trying to do that all the time. It doesn't suck to have a song on the radio, let me say that. But it's sort of not really up to me whether, as I say, I have a new record coming out in next spring, and we're going to send songs to the radio, and I hope that they play them. But will they? I don't know.
okay, yeah, no,
Josh said, do you know the people to send it to then?
Yeah, and my record label sort of have lists of kind of radio programmers, and in this country and in America and in Canada and Australia and Europe and all the rest of it. So it gets sent out, but there's a lot of weird politics surrounding that kind of thing. And like I'm now in my 40s and on my 10th album, which means that I don't come in as kind of hot, exciting young new artist anymore, which is a thing across that we all have to bear at a certain point.
Born in 1981, I suppose makes you part of the MTV generation, who were the first people to benefit from quintessential music television and identify with the music video. In your opinion, how did this bring you closer to music and lay the foundation for your career?
That's a good question. I think that, as you say, Josh, I grew up in a time with where music videos were just a thing. Every song, every band had a music video. Every song that you liked had a music video, which meant that there was a visual accompaniment to the music that I liked. And I never really experienced the world before that was the case. So it's interesting kind of reading about people listening to the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or whoever and not really having a visual reference point aside from a photo on an album sleeve. I don't quite know how that would feel. I always knew what Nirvana looked like, and I knew what Green Day looked like as a kid and stuff like that. Actually, it's worth saying I had a wonderful moment in my life. I used to trade VHSs before the internet made that a waste of time. And I got hold of a tape. There's a band called Husker Du, who are a kind of American kind of pre-grunge band who I love. And I love Nirvana, and Kurt Cobain kind of was a very handsome man. He looked like a male model. You know, he probably would reject that, but he was a very pretty man. And I'd listened to loads of Husker Du, and I just kind of, I got them on tapes and stuff, and I kind of assumed that they would look the same as Nirvana. And then Husker Du, it's like Bob Mould's like a kind of fat, balding gay guy, and there's like, you know, Grant Hart has like a weird handlebar moustache. They're super odd, uncomfortable looking people. And when I put that VHS in and watched it, it was Husker Du live at the Camden Palace, 1986 or 7, something like that. And it really blew my mind in a good way. It was like, oh wow, like not everybody who makes this music is as pretty as Kurt Cobain. That's awesome. That made me really happy because I didn't feel like a pretty person when I was younger, you know. So that was kind of cool. I mean, I guess, you know, I've made quite a lot of videos in my time. Some of them I like, some of them I really don't. Let's just say that politely. But they can, at their best, they're an interesting extra form of creativity. You know, you can have kind of narrative music videos, and you can have cool performance videos and stuff. You can present something about yourself to the world. But like ultimately, I care about the music, you know. And I guess as a kid, you know, you'd have a video for the singles on any given album, and I'm definitely an albums guy. And quite often, you know, you wouldn't have a video for 9 out of the 11 tracks on a record, and I enjoyed those just as much.
What are the sounds and music that remind you of your childhood?
Well, so my parents don't really listen to modern music, right? They don't really believe in drum kits or electrification. Uh, they're pretty kind of like Benjamin Britten's kind of on the modern edge for them. So we didn't, you know, when I discovered kind of Iron Maiden and metal at that point, that was this huge kind of explosion in my mind. So Maiden always made me think of being a kid. But prior to that, the one other thing, there's a band, well, there's an act called Flanders and Swan, who were a kind of later period music hall kind of variety act. Lots of people know the song Mud, Mud, Glorious Mud. They wrote that. But they had their recordings, such as they were about 2 live albums, At the Drop of a Hat and At the Drop of Another Hat. And we used to listen to them in the car on long car journeys, you know, driving down to Cornwall or up Scotland and stuff when I was a kid. And I still adore those records. I've actually released 2 covers of Flanders and Swan songs in my time. And they're just, they're really cool. They're kind of old fashioned but beautiful. They've got a bit of a kind of Noel Coward vibe to them. They're very kind of English in a way that I quite like. And it makes me feel like a kid listening to that stuff.
Band. Josh is asking what era was the band from.
They released their records in the 1950s, I think, the 50s and 60s, but they'd been around for a while before then. But I think they wrapped it up by the end of the 60s because Michael Flanders died. I think there's a little bit of television footage of them that exists, but they're a kind of mid-century thing. Let's say that.
Things like YouTube and social media have completely revolutionized the way that music is distributed to an audience. But when you were starting out, things like that were only just kind of starting out to come into existence. So in your opinion, was that more embryonic? And what do you think were the benefits of that music model? And our gatekeeper was a good thing.
Well, I think the most important thing to say in this whole debate about music formats and music distribution and the internet digitization and all that sort of thing is that I care about music a lot more than I care about the logistics behind it. I don't, you know, when I started out, the first couple of touring bands I was in was super DIY, and we'd like the guitarist in my first band's mum had a CD burner, which in the mid-90s was big news. So we used to borrow her computer and burn like 100 CDs at a time, and then we'd hand make the packaging and then put them together and sell them at shows. And there was, you know, it's easy to be nostalgic about that. It was really fun. It was really cool, kind of gluing covers yourself and having this thing that was completely self-created. But at the same time, I mean, I was mentioned kind of tape trading and stuff like that. I did loads of that when I was younger because I quite quickly got into a lot of pretty obscure music that was not sold in record stores in this country. And again, it's easy to be nostalgic about the hunt, and about how difficult it might be to find something. But at the same time, I think that there's a bit of kind of rose-tinted spectacles going on there, in the sense that, like, when I was a kid, I remember at one point I was trying to track down an album called Age of Quarrel by the Cro-Mags, which is a kind of foundational metalcore record, and it took me 18 months to find a copy of it. And I eventually got a hold of a copy of it, and it's all right. I mean, it's not my favorite album I've made. But if now anybody listening to this can find a copy of Age of Quarrel by the end of this sentence by just going on Spotify and typing in Age of Quarrel, done. And ultimately, I think that's better, because I think that access is important. I think that access should be universal. And in some ways, what the proper kind of the streaming world, the kind of complete ubiquitization of music, if you like, has done is it's kind of destroyed genre as a concept in a way that I think is really, really cool. And starting with kind of Vampire Weekend and on from there, I think that we have less kind of balkanized kind of music these days, and I think that's kind of cool, because a young band growing up, they might be really into, let's say, punk rock, but there's no reason at all why they can't listen to absolutely everything else and mix that into their sound as well. And I think you look at a band like Idols, for example, and it's like their range of influence is pretty weird, and I love Idols, by the way, but like they've got a kind of 80s post-punk vibe going on, mixed in with a bit of kind of like Don Caballero, and it's just a really odd mix, and I don't think that would have been as easy to create before the streaming world existed, and therefore you get more interesting new music, and that's cool.
I completely that was the thing I love her free. Where I can't in yeah, and I find that really excellent.
Yeah, Josh said he's a bit like that with TV. He likes to find old sort of archived TV shows
Sure.
that haven't been seen for a number of years because he finds it really exciting.
Yeah, and you can do that now, like in the 90s, like you'd have to be trading VHSs to make that happen.
Yeah.
And it's easy to kind of be nostalgic for that, but it was a pain in the arse. It took forever.
Okay. You began your career in a rock band called Million Dead. And I've spoken to many people about the delicate dynamics of being in a band. But as the lead singer, what responsibility do you have to ensure the status quo?
Good question. I mean, Million Dead, I'm very proud of that band and the things that we did and the music that we made. We were a radical egalitarian democracy, which in the short term, I think made for better music, but meant that it was unlikely that we were going to survive for very long as a band in the long run, because we fell out about everything. We nearly broke up in the studio whilst we were making our first album over the cover artwork. Like, it was just ludicrous. And by the end of that band, we were a band for 4.5 years, and we had fallen out with each other comprehensively by the end of it. We did a sort of farewell tour where like no one was talking to anybody else, and it was just, and we were in a little van. It was grim. I was the lead singer in that band, but I wasn't kind of like the dominant figure. I wrote the lyrics for the band, but we all contributed to the music. And there wasn't like a sense that I was like more important than anybody else. The going solo, and I have a band now. I have the Sleeping Souls, but it's definitely my project. It's my name on the front of it, and I am the boss these days, which is Nice. I get my way all the time. I mean, it has its pluses and its minuses, more pluses, I'd say, but like ultimately, if things go well, I take all the credit, and if things go badly, I tend to take all the blame. So, you know, you do get to kind of be more kind of pure about creative vision and that kind of thing. But at the same time, yeah, if you get it wrong, then nobody else, you can't really blame anybody else. If you play a bad show or make a shit record or whatever it might be, like it's your fault.
Well, you need you your yeah. So it's not but history. So how did you make the shit a little bit like
Josh said, listening to your show.
yeah. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Josh said, listening to your solo stuff, it's not as heavy, it's lighter. How did you make that transition?
I guess the main thing was just that I was listening to different types of music, and I got really obsessed with songwriting as an idea. I mean, we had songs in Million Dead, obviously, but like they were sort of put together a bit like a cut and shut in a junkyard. You know, we just sort of have bits of stuff and sort of hammer them into each other until we had something that was roughly 3 to 4 minutes long. I got really obsessed with this idea that songwriting is an art form unto itself, which I think it is. And you know, into the classic songwriters, and that includes everybody from Johnny Cash, but you know, ABBA classic songwriters, and Nina Simone, and there's so many different people to cite when it comes to songwriters and idea. But like, and also I was kind of into this kind of acoustic guitar thing. Like at the end of Million Dead, I was convinced that I had been sort of let down by the other guys in the band. I think I'm now old enough to say that it was my fault as much as anybody else's. But at the time, I felt kind of let down. And that, so the idea that I could go on tour on my own, which I did for the first 2 or 3 years of my solo career, it was just me on the train with a guitar and a backpack. And a laptop with a CD burner in it, because that was more accessible by then. I didn't have to rely on anybody else, and I could play anywhere. It didn't need a PA necessarily. You know, I could play squats and house parties and roofs and basements, and you know, it didn't really matter. And that was really kind of powerful, both logistically and artistically to me. There is that kind of figure that kind of haunts popular music of the solo troubadour, you know, and I was really obsessed with that. And therefore, as a result, I mean, I think, you know, all of that leads into things getting less heavy at that moment in time. I think the last record I did and the new one I've just finished actually kind of have moments of getting back to being as heavy as Million Dead was, but mainly it was just I was listening to more stuff like Townes Van Zandt, and it was like he doesn't scream very much, so.
So you collaborated with a few people. Is there anyone else you would like to collaborate with?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done as much as some people, and because I've had so long of being the boss and all the rest of it, it's not always the easiest thing for me to get into collaborating with people. But nevertheless, I've done a bunch of tours with Counting Crows, and they're good friends of mine, and they're just the most amazing musicians, and it would be really fun to do a song with them. They remind me of the band, as in Robbie Robertson and the band, in the sense that each of them individually is just a world-class player, but their actual number one skill is playing with each other, and they don't ever play across each other. And I think that's remarkable. I mean, I would say Nick Cave, but the problem is like I'm not sure what I would do in a room with Nick Cave other than go, "You're amazing," over and over again, because he's like my musical god. And I'm not sure I'd bring very much to the table. Maybe I'd just sit in on a recording session when he does his own stuff.
This is a very apt question given his recent departure from the BBC, but you're somewhat part of broadcasting history, being the last ever live act to appear on the influential Lamacq Live on Radio 1. It's a big question, but how would you sum up Steve Lamacq's contribution to new music and what his legacy to British broadcasting?
I mean, wow, where to begin? That is a big question. I love Steve. I mean, he's a friend at this point in my life. But we became friends because he stumbled across my stuff really early doors, and the last track on my first album, Ballad of Me and My Friends, was recorded live at a show, and Steve was in the front row. And this was at a point in time when really not that many people knew who I was, and you know, so. To take that as an example, like Steve is just an enthusiast for new music in a way that I find amazing and admirable and also slightly baffling, just in the sense that like at this point in my life, and Steve's a good 20 years older than me, like I still, 15 maybe, I still, I try and listen to new music from time to time, but I spend quite a lot of time dipping back into the oldies that I know well, and I'm nowhere near as plugged into like the underground or new music as I could be. And Steve just has this unquenchable thirst for new music in a way that I just think is bananas, but brilliant. And I think that the number of bands from all different genres and all different walks of life and all different scenes and all different musical backgrounds who've been helped by Steve over the years is pretty incalculable. I think that it's great that he did that. He's kind of moving out to pasture a bit these days, but he's I think he can look back on a job well done, in the sense that there are so many bands, starting with Blur, basically, who at least in part owe their career to his support, and I think that's a wonderful thing that he can take pride in.
He is my dream.
It just said he's got to say he's on his dream list to get on the show.
Well, I'll see if I can have a word, see what we can do. I mean, I can't make any promises.
So you kind of touched upon this a little bit, but in your opinion, how important are initiatives like BBC Introducing to discover the next generation of musicians?
I think they're important. I think that essentially we live in a time now where there's the difficult thing is attention grabbing. Like in the 80s and the 90s, it was quite difficult to release a record, but because it was difficult, if you got as far as actually getting a record in a shop or whatever, you would come to people's attention. These days, distribution is so universalized that like anybody in their bedroom can make a song and get it on Spotify with great ease. And what that means is that the difficult thing for any band, including established bands, is like, how do you get people to listen to you rather than the 9 million other people who put out a song that day? And there's easily more than 24 hours of new music released every day, so it's impossible for anyone to stay abreast of everything. So the role served by stuff like BBC Introducing these days, in the old days, it was kind of bringing stuff to the attention of labels who might then sign it, who might then distribute it. These days, it's more a case of curation, I suppose, and it's very easy to feel completely bamboozled by the amount of new music out there. I do all the time. And to have somebody whose taste that you trust, whether that's Steve Lamacq or any of the BBC DJs, or indeed or a podcast or a playlister on Spotify who you pay attention to, whatever it might be, to have somebody who can kind of go, I like this stuff, why don't you try this, is a really useful role to play at this point in time.
In 2002, you released your ninth. Sorry, yeah. Eyes were not being my friend. In 2020, so at least Josh is on the ball.
Yeah.
You released your ninth studio album, Playtime, with Christopher and Francis, Volume 1.
Oh, yeah.
Alongside your longtime friend and collaborator, Chris Baker. what was your inspiration for this, and what's the process of releasing a collaborative album?
Well, that's a very special case, that particular record. Chris has been my best friend since I was 3 years old. He's my oldest friend. I love him to pieces. He's also a total maniac. We played in our first bands together when we were kind of like 11, 12 years old, playing Nirvana covers and stuff. And then I've gone off and done what I do, and Chris has sort of disappeared more into the kind of weird electronic world, shall we say, like Aphex Twin on down. And he releases records under the name Blakey as well. And they're just, I love them to pieces, and they're very much like a little bit like putting a microphone into his mind, which is a very strange place. And we've been talking for ages about doing some sort of collaboration. And in the end, we started messing around with some kind of like easy listening covers, but just trying to make them as weird and uncomfortable as we possibly could. And essentially, I picked the songs and I recorded vocals and guitar or piano for the songs, and then I'd send them to Chris and just kind of stand back. And it would take him a while, but generally a few months later, he'd send back something just completely unhinged. And then in quite a lot of cases, I went back and redid the vocals afterwards, and we had long discussions about structure and arrangements. And then, my God, the mix took a long time because we were coming at it from two completely different kind of sonic traditions. But in the end, we finally got it done. I think it took us 9 years to make that record. And we put it out. We are now sort of vaguely discussing doing a Christmas album. Try and ruin everyone's Christmas by doing sort of completely horrible versions of Paul McCartney songs and stuff. But it was loads of fun. And I'm glad we finally got it out there, because it's kind of been on my to-do list in one form or another for nearly a decade.
Oh, yeah.
Josh said he can't imagine collaborating with his best friend on anything.
Fair enough.
Josh said, was there any arguments?
There were some differences of opinion, should we say. The main thing, like I say, was a mix, because like the way that you mix an electronic album and the way that you mix a rock album is pretty different. And we both had a go at mixing the record, or like mixing one song each and send it to each other, and it was so different. And we were both like, well, my version's better. And in the end, we went to somebody else. We called a friend of ours and said, can you mix it for us? Because otherwise we are going to fall out with each other. So we got somebody else to do it.
So I was speaking to the great Matt Everett about you, and he said that you would do a show at any time, anywhere, and for everyone. What is it? I mean, you did touch upon this briefly earlier, but what is it about that you love playing live, and how important is it to establish that relationship between performer and audience?
It's all about the relationship between performer and audience. I mean, it's a form of connection that is better than anything else I've experienced in my life. Obviously, you know, if we're being honest with each other, there's a sense in which it's really cool to present your art and have people pay attention and clap at the end and sing along and all that kind of thing. That's cool. But I love playing music, and I love sharing music with other people. And the other thing I think is that, how best to put this? It's the one thing in life that I'm sure that I have some aptitude for, that I can do well. Like, I'm pretty insecure about most everything else, but I know how to play a show, and therefore I feel good while I'm doing it. One of my other best friends said to me years ago, he said, the only place I've ever really seen you look comfortable in your skin is when you're on a stage, which I took as a huge compliment, actually. And I just love it. It's great. It's really fun. I mean, I think my Twitter bio still says this. Like, it says something like the annoying guy in the corner of the party with an acoustic guitar made good. And I was definitely the annoying guy at a party with an acoustic guitar for a long time in my teenage years. But the problem was I was either trying to play my own stuff or try and play weird, obscure kind of Husker Du covers or whatever it might be. And at a teenage party in the late 1990s, everyone was just like, what the fuck are you doing? So it didn't necessarily win me friends and influence people at that point. But yeah, I just love it. It's really, really fun. And props to Matt Everett, by the way. He's a lovely, lovely guy.
Josh said, what is it about creative people? They seem to be shit at everything else. For example, Josh is terrible or shit at anything technical or manual, but you give him a bit of paper or probably an iPad in these days now, and he can do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess the universe distributes skills with some justice. I mean, I can't draw to save my life. I can barely draw a stick man. It's crushingly embarrassing, and I can't dance, and I can't cook, and I can't do lots and lots of things. I mean, who knows? But I guess the other thing is that, like, I think that creative people focus in on a thing. You know, when you're a kid, if you find something that makes it easier for you to express yourself, you're probably going to spend your time and energy focusing on that. I could probably learn to dance if you put a gun to my head. I just find it really uncomfortable. I have, you know what, I actually started learning to cook during the lockdown because it was I started touring when I was 16, so I never learned to cook. And I can now make a mean risotto.
Is that it?
Josh said, is that it?
You know what, 2 nights ago I made a cheesecake and it went quite well. It maintained its form once it came out of the pan, the tin.
Josh loves the cheesecake.
Well, there's still some in the fridge.
So looking back at your career, what's your proudest achievement?
This is, it might momentarily sound like I'm dodging the question. I promise I'm not. Like, my proudest achievement is that I have a career, that I'm still doing this, that you know, I don't want to sound overly melodramatical like a teenager when I say this, but like when I was a kid, like my parents actively worked quite hard to stop me from playing music. They really, really didn't want me to do this. All my teachers, all my friends were skeptical, you know, and there was just this huge sense of like, don't do that. Why are you going to do that? That's a dumb idea. And then even when you kind of get in your first touring band and maybe you're releasing or self-releasing a record or whatever, a lot of people do that and then nothing more happens. And, you know, maybe that's because they don't want to, and maybe because the universe is against them, or they got no luck, or whatever it might be. And the fact that I'm releasing my 10th album next year, and we've got a world tour in the works for that, and you know, I'm producing records down my garden and all the rest of it. It feels unlikely in a way that I really enjoy, and I'm really proud of the fact that I didn't quit at any point, and that I still get to do this. I don't have to work another job. I mean, what a joy, you know. I feel very lucky for that, but also proud.
When it's album out.
Josh said, when's the album coming out?
It's going to be out in, I'm going to say, the spring. I'm gonna be a little bit coy about this because I'm not sure we're supposed to be announcing the release date yet. But I mean, I would love to put it out today because it is finished. But pressing vinyl takes forever, and you've got to do promo and singles and music videos and all that kind of business. So you know, there's lots of work to do, but soon.
Well, this one out this from our
Oh, okay.
yeah, so imagine if we were done I think you say that.
Josh said it's unlikely that this podcast will be out until the new year anyway. So do you
Okay.
want to answer that
Oh, well, I'm not sure. I think it's going to be out in May. I'll tell you that. There we go. There we go. The
That's
start of
good.
May. But I probably, it doesn't matter. Whatever. It's like I say, I would love it if the release date was tomorrow. That would make me very happy.
That's cool. And what's next? Oh, after the album, of course. What's next for Frank Turner?
So the album is going to engender a lot of touring work, which I'm excited about. The new record label I'm working with is much more internationally focused. So I've got first trips to places like South America and Singapore and all that kind of thing. And I feel very, very privileged to do that kind of thing. There's huge parts of the world I've only ever been to because I play the guitar, and that feels fundamentally ridiculous to me. And we're going to add some more places to that list, and that's awesome. Beyond that, I do. So during the lockdown, my big project was to learn how to produce other people's records, which is a thing that I do. So today I've been working on a record by a singer called Grace Petrie. I'm working on another Meths record. I've got lots of different things on the docket, which is really exciting as well, because it's a different form of creativity being the producer rather than being the artist, but I love it. So lots of that. But yeah, mainly touring, I'd say, which is fine. I'm very excited about that.